Oh, welcome back, everybody, to the Happy Cynics. We're going to pick up where we left off last time, and we're trying to understand today's generations through music. And Isaac and I had walked through the 1960s, 70s, and 80s the last time. And so we're going to go through the 90s, the 2000s, and the 2000 teens, okay, the teens. And so I'm going to have to anyway defer to Isaac, and he knows this is his turn to kind of help me understand his generation or generations, as we kind of talked about before, where I'm on the cusp of baby boomer, in between baby boomers and Gen X. Isaac is right on the cusp in between millennials and Gen Z. So this, I'm looking forward to this. So Isaac, where do you want to start with?
Well, I think we should start with like one of the biggest differences between our generations of music. And I think that is like best seen in how popular rap is.
Ah, yes.
Because 60s, 70s, and 80s, there obviously is rap and hip hop as a genre, but it's not the modern version.
No.
Of those genres. So I think that really starts in the late 80s, specifically with 1988 NWA's Straight Outta Compton.
Yes.
That's like one of the first rap albums that, even though it doesn't get radio play, it doesn't get MTV play, a lot of stores don't sell it, it still becomes a best-selling album.
Right. Right.
And the reason it didn't have the mainstream appeal is because it was hyper countercultural. It's hyper violent, very angry, very sexual, very misogynistic even, in its lyrical content. It is not a like socially friendly album, but what it is very socially conscious of the lived experiences of the members of NWA.
Okay.
Right. So it's reflecting on their experience growing up, living their lives as adults in Compton as members of the Black community. So it features songs like F*** the Police. Gangster, Gangster. And then obviously Straight Outta Compton is the title track of the whole thing. And these are very incendiary songs. So that is
would
sort
you
of...
put Cop Killer in that same type genre?
Yeah,
that's
probably.
a song that I do remember. I remember everybody getting so upset about it. Cop Killer by Body Count, I believe it was.
Yeah, definitely same like ethos there.
Yes.
Right, and this is only 4 years before the LA race riots. Like there were racial tensions in LA around this time that this group is reflecting on.
Right.
And NWA is interesting because these people, some of them are still major players in the music industry, but their roots are in dealing drugs and like real gang life on the streets of Compton.
Well, that was part of, was it Tupac Shakur?
Well, so he's sort of a son of NWA, I would say.
All
because NWA, one of the original members is Dr. Dre.
Right. Okay.
And Dr. Dre left Ruthless Records, which was who NWA was signed with. It was started by Eazy-E, who's the founding member of NWA. Dr. Dre leaves because his contract wasn't very good and forms Death Row Records. And I think he did that in 1992. And Death Row is the label that signed Tupac and Snoop Dogg when they first started. So that's where like the very first celebrities of rap sort of get their start.
Right. Okay.
And a lot of this music is like, it has some of the elements of modern rap in that like some of it is ego boosting the artist itself.
Right.
But a lot of it is just like talking about the social condition of the lives of the people around them.
Right.
And sort of glorifying the life of like a gangster in Compton.
Right.
So following the foundation of Death Row Records, you get its counterpart on the East Coast in New York with Bad Boy Records.
Okay.
Started by Puff Daddy.
Yes.
And that's where like Diddy's been in the news recently.
Yeah.
P. Diddy.
Puff Daddy,
He's
P. Diddy, and yeah.
Yeah, the most famous member of Bad Boy Records is Biggie Smalls, the notorious B.I.G.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And so you see a shift. So now we're into the 90s of rap. Tupac is the most popular rap artist of all time.
Right.
Famous for rapping about like respecting women and like very, very socially conscious, kind of upfront with being on like the left side of the political spectrum. And
okay, so what do you think's going on culturally there?
At the same time as like he's being like, oh, we should respect women. We should stand up for those without power. He's also using the F word a lot.
Right.
He's rapping about violence. He's involved in various gang wars.
Right.
So there is this like the fact that he's so popular and so well known. I mean, he's kind of known as the greatest rap artist of all time today by a lot of people.
Right.
The fact that he's so renowned and so popular amongst in this like very young genre is, I think it's a rebellion against some of the commercialization of music that you see in the 80s.
Okay. Yeah, didn't he have some kind of connection with MC Hammer or not?
I'm not sure about that.
I remember they did a biopic on MC Hammer, and it seems to me that there was reference in that movie to Tupac getting gunned down.
Yeah, so the murder of Tupac is related to the feud that was going on between East Coast, West Coast rap.
Oh.
And so that's part of the new zeitgeist of the 90s is that this new genre and some of these new artists, and even this goes beyond rap, but it's got it towards the end of the 90s, the focus on celebrity of these countercultural icons sort of becomes more intense to the point that because these labels have connections to gang violence and there's more than just like music at stake here, real people get killed.
Yeah.
And that happens with Tupac gets shot down in LA, or not in LA, in Las Vegas. Right. And the Vegas police basically ignore it. They don't do anything to investigate it, and we still don't officially know who killed Tupac.
Right.
The same thing happens to Biggie in New York. And that's in like the space of a few months. And those were the two biggest artists at both of these labels that were feuding.
Oh.
But there are still people from those labels around, obviously. You know, Snoop Dogg is still around.
Right.
Dr. Dre is still around. Puff Daddy is still around. Bad Boy Records still exists in New York. So moving into like the early 90s to the late 90s, you get like this weird blend of like, well, we're still this socially conscious, like countercultural thing, but also our celebrity is really important. Yeah. So it starts to be more establishment at that time. There's really a lot of money being thrown around. Yeah.
Now let me ask you this, and I'm asking this honestly because I'm trying to. I do want to understand. I remember reading the black artists that achieved popularity and fame in the 70s and 80s, I kind of had the feeling, because I was probably, when the 90s were going down, that was, so I was like between 25 and then 35, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. Okay. I was 35 at the year 2000. So as I recall, it seemed to me that the whole rap genre and that whole circle was kind of a pushback against other black artists who had maybe become too white, if I can say it that way. Like, in other words, they had acclimated to white people too much instead of, and they were forgetting the whole ghetto scene and understanding your roots and all of that.
Well, that's explicitly mentioned in Straight Outta Compton. That like, so there's a line, I forget if it's in Straight Outta Compton or in The Police, where they talk about black cops are looking out for the white man.
Right.
So they do talk about like
Right.
sort of the like Uncle Tom
Right.
nature of their cultural place.
Right.
That there are black people and people who are culturally black that have sort of betrayed the black community as a whole.
Yeah. I mean, to a certain extent, not to get just a very quick aside, the O.J. Simpson trial was kind of seen with the black jurors as like a referendum on this kind of whole issue. Like, in other words, even if O.J. did it, they owe us this one for all the other stuff that we've endured. That was kind of the vibe that came across, it seemed, from the public.
Yeah, well, and also from the broader public, like when Tupac died,
right,
and there was all this violence surrounding these record labels, there were some people whose mindset was kind of like, well, see what all this rapping about violence gets you.
Right.
It was sort of like a repeat of the AIDS crisis, and the response from like the Christian right to the AIDS crisis, like, well, see what being gay gets you.
Well, even some of this happened within too, because like MC Hammer dropped out of music and then took a church and became a pastor.
I didn't know that.
Oh,
well,
yeah.
Al Green did that before him.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, so that I was born like 3 months before Tupac was killed.
Oh, okay.
So I didn't grow up with this music. I sort of I inherited this music when I was a little bit older.
But it was still getting playtime, probably.
Yes.
Yeah.
I definitely knew about who Tupac was when I was
there aren't too many
teen.
I don't think there are too many people in America who haven't heard that name, even if they have no idea who he is. They've heard his name.
Yeah.
Because he's pretty iconic, it seems.
Well, so the whole like the conflict between Tupac, Biggie sort of brings the rap industry around to saying like you have people like Snoop,
right,
and Dr. Dre and other people who are saying like we have to like not be this violent about it. We can't be this caught up with our own celebrity that we're going to gun down each other.
Yeah.
And that brings into the scene my sort of like era of hip hop, which is Eminem, 50 Cent, Outkast, Jay-Z, Lil Wayne, and then like towards the end of this era, which is the 2000s like era, comes like Lil Jon, Crunk, Kanye West.
Right.
And that sort of the mainstreamification of rap sort of happens throughout the years from 2000 to 2010.
Right.
But it also introduces like a sort of a new approach to rap, especially with the adoption of Eminem by Dr. Dre. And it would be hard to talk about Eminem without talking about how important he was to the genre of rap as a whole in pulling in a white audience. Because he was white and he's not rapping about the ghetto life, even though he does talk about that and he is from the ghettos of Detroit. But he's mostly talking about his own internalized anger, his own internalized, it's extremely violent. his own internalized homophobia, his own internalized misogyny, his own toxic masculinity.
Right.
And the media sort of characterizes him as if like him talking about this in his music is bad. That we shouldn't be talking about this in public. We shouldn't be discussing this.
Right, right.
And I think that is like one of the strongest differences between the previous generations and sort of my generation is that when it comes to these mental health issues and these social issues and our relationships with them, we want to get it out there.
Right.
Right. So if you've never listened to Eminem, he has a character that he plays on these records called Slim Shady. It's his alter ego.
Okay.
Lots of rap artists have alter egos, but Slim Shady is the most famous because it's Eminem's.
Okay.
And so when he's rapping about like how he hates gay people, he's not saying it as if like he approves of this. He's playing a villain on a record.
Yeah. Sort
of the way David Bowie would play characters before, but this is like a much darker version of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So Eminem is sort of changing what rap is about from it being about social issues and our own celebrity to now being about social issues, but through our own inter dialogue with ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So it takes an inward turn.
Okay. All right.
And then at the same time, it becomes about partying and it becomes about dancing.
Yeah. Yes.
So that's where 50 Cent, Jay-Z, not so much Outkast. Outkast is a little bit more of like the old guard of rap at this point. They're Southern rap, so they're not like in the dynamic between East and West Coast. But they are more like socially conscious, even though they make fun dance songs like Hey Ya.
Yes. Yes.
And then that all sort of culminates towards the ends of the 2000s with like Lil Jon's Get Low.
Okay.
Which is an introduction of a different style of music into the hip hop subgenre,
all right,
which is crunk. And then moving on from the 2000s. So now we've gone from, to sort of trace the trajectory, we're like hyper countercultural, talking about race relations in Compton,
right,
which is the first like popular thing, all the way through. Now it's a little bit more about celebrity. It's a little bit more about like social issues that are not like sociological in scale.
Mm-hmm.
They're more like interpersonal.
Right.
And then they're like purely internal. And this is now about like having fun, dancing. You know, there's not a lot of rap songs in this time about like the war in Iraq. Even though there are those songs out there. I'm not saying that doesn't exist, but there's not like protest music going on in the mainstream rap genre.
Right.
So then that brings us into the 2010s where rap sort of becomes a commodity now.
Yeah.
So it gets incorporated into like Katy Perry songs and Justin Bieber songs, and it goes mainstream basically.
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of reflects what our generation was experiencing at these times, because we went from, you know, Eminem is like sort of the crossover between millennial and Gen X rap. Because I would call 90s rap like Gen X rap.
Okay, right.
And like 90s is like Gen X millennial rap, whereas Eminem is millennial rap almost exclusively. And there's a lot of millennials are famous for their angst. It's sort of our, you know, obsession with mental health, that sort of thing.
Okay.
And we're a little bit maybe self-absorbed in our own specialness. Which is reflected in the rap. Like these rap artists are like, I have the most street cred, you know.
Right.
I have the most money. I'm the most successful, blah, blah, blah. Until you get to the 2010s, now it's millennial Zoomer rap, and it's much more about like, we're just going to have a good time. We're not going to worry about anything. We're just going to party, do drugs, have sex, you know, get low.
Yeah. So you have a lot of, say, protest, countercultural stuff going on in the 90s. but then this kind of gradually tones down. I would say it that way. I wouldn't say fizzle out, but
yeah, and part of it is not that it tones down, but that it becomes mainstream to be edgy.
okay. Can you give me an example there? I mean, I'm other than what, like, I mean, unless you're just what you're talking about. I mean, the stuff in the 90s was definitely, I mean, like the stuff you started out mentioning. I mean, that was meant to be inflammatory.
Yeah, but now, so...
And what do you mean by
I
edgy
think-
here? So I'm not exactly sure what you mean. Just blunt, or like discussing topics that aren't supposed to be sung about or something?
I think it's... Part of it is that millennials have very little interest in formality and like going along with cultural norms.
Right.
And that
Etiquette.
goes from being very like, yeah, exactly, etiquette. That goes from being like very, very controversial and rejected by culture, except for this like small group of people who like really get what this is about, with NWA and up through the 90s. And then by the time you get to Eminem, he's winning Grammys. Like, that's a very strong cultural shift over the course of like 14 years, where, you know, you have the Police going after NWA at their concerts, to Eminem performing with Elton John at the Grammys, singing about somebody who kills themselves at the end of the song.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. So
What I'm trying to illustrate is like there's a cultural shift in what's acceptable to talk about and how seriously we take the taboos of conversation.
all right.
My generation cares much less about that.
Okay. All right. Now you want to trace another thread? Because I know that. Okay. So, I mean, where did the Spice Girls fit in?
Well, we'll get to, so there's more to the hip hop story.
Oh, yes.
Because as we get into the teens, right, you get Kanye, Kendrick, Post Malone.
Right.
I could go on because it's so recent that there's so many of the artists that are still relevant.
Right.
But this is like where this really splits the genre into rap sort of joins this like this cultural stream of music.
Yeah.
That is the dominant industry force.
Right.
But also there's this subset of rap that's like characterized by people like Young Thug, which is like the SoundCloud rap movement.
Okay.
Where this is just people in their bedroom making music with this like sort of new technology that's suddenly available to consumers that wasn't there before. So like this is the time of like bedroom pop becomes really popular, but also like SoundCloud rap is sort of the bedroom pop of the rap genre.
Okay.
Where you can make this by yourself in your own house, your own apartment. And because of that, it opens up the artistic landscape to whoever has a computer and an internet connection.
Yeah.
And some of those people go crazy. I mean, they get huge.
Yeah. Billie Eilish.
Yeah, in the pop genre,
it's Billie
Eilish.
She's not in that stream, but yeah. Or Bieber.
But
yeah.
And then you have, because of the way the internet is sort of a melting pot for these artists, suddenly hip hop starts to incorporate other genres and other, not just genres, but even like cultural music tastes into itself.
Right.
And then that practice, when it gets popular enough in, you know, the late 20-teens, is sort of then brought into the fold of the mainstream music landscape. And so you get these weirdly cross-cultural things going on that you wouldn't have had before. So like Despacito is a huge #1 hit, and it's entirely in Spanish, but it's also incorporating hip-hop sensibilities and also pop ideas into itself. And so it's like a weird mixture of Latin beats, pop hooks, and hip-hop rap all in one song. And that sort of becomes the model for the music industry going forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that can be very good and pleasant. I love the song Despacito, but it also can weaken some of the strengths that these very narrow approaches to artistic creation brought to the like cultural landscape in previous times.
Okay.
That we've sort of come to a mono genre where in the 90s it was a rejection of like cultural ideas and the way culture had sort of polished over the artistic like edginess, and then that becomes sort of the selling point of these things, and then it gets polished over again, and then it goes edgy again, and there's a sort of like give and take between these two like cultural forces of like, we're going to protest, we're going to sing about stuff we shouldn't be, but also we're going to make, you know, we're going to become obsessed with celebrities and dancing and not really singing about anything.
Yeah. So this, you know, this kind of like sugary, you know, you had the girl bands, boy bands, and even the kind of like Britney Spears stuff. And it was just kind of like feel good music, wasn't it? And so what's going on with the culture at this point? So like, how do you fit that in there? Like what? So are these the folks that, I mean, obviously, like I talked about with the 60s, it wasn't like 60% of the people were on board with the Vietnam protest. I mean, it was a significant subculture. But then you had most people that just wanted to kind of step back from that and just kind of continue business as usual. So what do you think? What do you think there in the 90s and the aughts in the 2000s?
Yeah, I think because the 90s you were dealing with the end of the Gulf War,
right?
I think the 90s were a pretty volatile time for most people. You had a recession at the very beginning and end of that decade,
right?
There were a lot of like cultural things moving, which I think also characterizes the 2010s, especially with like the Donald Trump presidency and then what we're doing now. But in between there, you have the Bush years, which were, at least for Americans, besides 9/11, a fairly stable time up until 2008. And 2008 wasn't like a time for protesting, even though people did. But like people didn't really see it as like a cultural issue or something to be like protested in the streets. At least not in the mainstream music. We will get to some of the protesters in other genres.
Right.
But for like pop and rap, they were mostly seeing it as an opportunity, like, we're just going to put music out there that helps people get through this time.
Okay.
And so it's a lot of feel good fluff stuff. That's not to say that that's universally true, but like in terms of what was like really popular, this is what was getting played.
Right.
So I'm not trying to like say this about like, oh, there was no like good music about, 2008, or there was no like, challenging music in these times. But like what really characterized what people were listening to through this time was like not all that challenging of stuff. We get like Soulja Boy comes out in this time.
Oh, okay.
It's very like fun party music. Well, and I think that was sort of the vibe. If I had to assign a vibe to a time period, like when I was in high school for all these songs, that was the energy. It was like Obama's president, good things are happening.
Yeah.
we're not too worried about what's going on.
Yeah. But I really do think that that's where some of the, I'm sorry, but I really do think that some of what led to the Trump presidency was people who reacted against the Obama presidency.
Oh, yeah. We didn't see that coming at the time, though.
No.
Well, and also, you got to remember, like, conservatives still hate this music, even though it's, like, not very pushy about the subjects, because it's very sexual and it's very party music, right? So there is, like, this isn't, like, friendly music of, like, this isn't, All You Need Is Love by the Beatles.
Right.
This is still, like...
Baby Got Back.
Till the Sweat Drops Down.
Yeah,
I mean, like, it's very, like,
right.
it's raunchy.
Right.
That is not being, like, accepted by some of the older generations.
Right.
Even though it's our generation just doesn't care.
Yeah. All right. Okay. I'm following all this so far. I'm still waiting for Kurt Cobain and Nirvana in here. So
yeah, so that's where I wanted to go next, because
Okay.
that's more familiar to me.
Okay. Me too.
So, if we rewind
Right.
back to the late 80s, early 90s, 1991, Nirvana's Nevermind comes out and changes rock music forever. With Smells Like Teen Spirit,
Yes.
Come As You Are, In Bloom. There's all these, like, great songs from Nevermind. But at the time, nobody knew what grunge was.
Right.
I mean, obviously grunge had existed before Nirvana, but nobody in the culture at large knew about grunge.
Yeah. It had not
Until
really
Nirvana
moved into
came
the
around.
mainstream at all.
And Nirvana is, like, I think a lot of people look back at Nirvana like, wow, they were, like, just, like, concrete statues just waiting for greatness to be attained. But the landscape of when Nevermind comes out and Nirvana becomes huge is still, like, spandex costumes, hair metal, Guns N' Roses, crazy guitar, like...
Right. They call
Nirvana
it hair metal.
Yeah.
Like these guys with the long hair.
It's glam rock.
Yes, glam rock, yes.
So when Nirvana comes out and they're, like, wearing baggy jeans and hoodies and none of their hair is done and they all look, like, ridiculous, and then they're playing slow songs that are not hard to play, but they're super, super emotive. They're so expressive in what they're trying to do. That's what, like, people grab onto about Nirvana.
Right.
And that, I think,
It's
sort
more
of
visceral.
upsets the apple cart.
Yeah.
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 I think that's what kind of gives us our rock landscape today, because even today, bands that sort of go for the glam metal, like, bands that we've inherited from that era that were edgy at the time, like Metallica, are sort of seen as establishment, boring rock.
Yeah. So, okay. So let me, I don't want to stop I don't want to break up your train of thought here, but this really, I think, brings out a really important point. I think at this, with what we're talking about here, or what you're talking about here, and I'm just kind of nodding along, this is really important because there's a very sharp contrast between the older generations now, who the way they dealt with things was keep it private, put a public veneer over it, keep a certain, like, don't talk about this stuff out in the open, keep everything respectable out in the public square by not talking even about sensitive things. That's just, in other words, and your generation is like, no, we want to deal with this stuff out in the open. Hey, let's just get it out there and work our way through it. And I think the older generations are, no, let's just shove this stuff back into the closet, sweep it under the rug, whatever kind of analogy you want to use based on the issue, fill in the blanks. But I can see that sharp contrast because, again, like even we were talking about, even with these protest groups in the 60s, there was so much censorship going on, like in what they could put in their recordings versus what they would play on the air, on the radio, and what they could get away with on live television, etc. There were still a lot of people that wanted to, like, okay, we're going to run this through some kind of a filter. And in fact, some of this stuff is what led to the eventual death of live television. Because we have the technology, but it really was about censorship. And so everything's going to be pre-recorded, because then if somebody tries to slip something in that we don't like, then we can just bleep it out or whatever. And
Yeah.
that's a big shift.
Well, so you were talking last episode about I forget the band specifically, but he like got naked on stage. He was doing all this stuff on live TV that was just like unacceptable.
Right.
Was that the Doors?
Well, yeah, Jim Morrison exposed himself. I guess he dropped his pants or whatever, and or pulled out his penis or something on stage. I can't remember exactly what it was, but then that's why they were arrested. The cops ran right up on stage and tackled him or whatever.
And was that the same one that was on the Ed Sullivan Show and got kicked off for some reason?
Yeah, because they didn't want him to say, "Girl, we can't get much higher."
Oh, right.
And they wanted to say something else, and he said it anyway. So, yeah.
So that is sort of the same mindset as like a Kurt Cobain, Nirvana sort of band.
Right.
Because so there are a lot of good stories of Nirvana messing around with censorship.
Mm-hmm.
They performed at the UK's Top of the Pops.
Okay.
And were told no live instruments.
Oh.
So Kurt is the only one performing, essentially. And if you watch the video of it, he's playing guitar like a robot would play guitar, just going up and down with his hand on the strings, not to the beat of the song at all. And he sings Smells Like Teen Spirit an octave lower than the recording of it. And it is just a horrific thing. They were performing on some live television show, and they had been forbidden from playing the song Me for obvious reasons.
Right.
And Kurt played the first 2 bars of Me before he started playing Smells Like Teen Spirit.
Oh.
So they're not fans of censorship.
Right. Right.
But also you see the sort of the same cultural issues coming up that came up in rap come up in Nirvana.
Right.
Like the song Me is about treating women with respect. Mm-hmm. Even though it's coming at it from obviously a very raw, real, we're not going to censor anything we're talking about. We're just going to say the words that we need to say to get at this issue. And that is sort of the 90s ethos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I can see that. I can see that. All right. So grunge, I'm trying to remember. So did that eventually die off? I don't think is it still around at all?
Grunge? I'm sure there's still bands playing grunge
I'm
music,
sure there's a couple. Yeah.
But in terms of popularity, grunge sort of went the way of ska, which is it had its little moment in the 90s, and it's not really around anymore.
Well, I think the death of Kurt Cobain really put a kind of a damper on all that.
Yeah, you still had bands like Soundgarden, and Audio Slave is sometimes considered grunge. So it was still around, but I think it was not really in the popular mind anymore, past 96.
Yeah, yeah.
But it gets replaced by something that sort of takes up the mantle, which is in, I think, maybe just a couple years after Kurt's death, Green Day's Dookie comes out, and pop punk becomes the new grunge.
Mm-hmm.
And pop punk is kind of like grunge in that it's talking about these angsty issues. It's talking about, it's very raw, it's very real. It's not very like, it's not happy music. It's not feel good music.
Right.
But pop punk is a little bit more polished, I'll say. It's more upbeat.
Okay.
It tends to be faster. It tends to be like a little more angry about it than sad.
Yeah.
Which is like grunge is like sad. Pop punk is angry.
Right. Right.
And that's sort of the way that rap went too. If you remember, like Eminem, that's a mad dude. He's angry about these things. Pop punk is sort of the same way.
Well, in general, entertainment, and we've talked about this before, but a lot of people, they go into it primarily as artists. They want to make a living at it and establish themselves and have a career and all that, but they kind of enter in kind of carving their own niche, establishing their own contribution to whatever it is. But then whenever they hit on that one big successful album and then the money starts rolling in, I think for a lot of artists, that's too tempting to pass up. And then a lot of them over time, and I don't blame them, but then they basically try to keep and I think they're pressured by the record companies and, other people in the business to just keep bringing the dollars in and just kind of stick with the formula now. So you kind of lose that edge that that the artist has at the beginning, and then they kind of go commercial. We've talked about that. Even the ones
I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
One of the most famous examples of that from this time is Weezer. Their first two albums are like perfection. The Blue Album and Pinkerton, but they are not anything like what the band does anymore, which is mostly pop music. Right.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So when you talk about that's what's kind of interesting as well. When you talk about this in terms of culture, it's like how do I say this? People kind of I think it seems like the average person in all generations, like whenever they're confronted by some kind of artistry that's pushing the envelope in some way or saying, hey, here's something that needs to be said, or here's something that needs to be expressed. People kind of look at that as kind of like taking medicine. They only want to take it in like small spoonfuls. And then they're probably only going to take so many before then they're going to want to wash it down with a sugary sweet Pepsi or something. Can I say that? I mean, that's what it kind of seems.
I think part of like, if we bring that narrative like up to the modern day, because I think Zoomers and Gen Alpha are sort of reacting against the millennial like out there-ness of these issues.
Okay.
If we bring like this story up to today, I think a lot of the mainstream labels realize that like what is selling about these bands is like their approach to these controversial topics, these private topics. And so like we're going to commodify the edginess of it all.
Okay.
We're commodifying angst. We're commodifying, and it sort of becomes, I mean, if you look at some of the bigger pop punk bands that have survived, like Green Day, and they're great bands. I'm not like saying these have no artistic merit, but like these guys are in their 40s. Yeah. Some of them are in their 50s, and they still look like they're teenagers. Like he's got his hair dyed black. He's got eyeliner on. It's just like, yeah, I'm not really convinced by this anymore.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the other great bands that like we have to mention if we're talking about pop punk, My Chemical Romance, Yellow Card. Up to today, there's like been a revival of pop punk that has not made it mainstream, but is present because that's my genre of music. That's like my favorite. But like My Chemical Romance is doing sort of like they're the queen of pop punk. You know, they have Welcome to the Black Parade, which is analogous to like Bohemian Rhapsody in terms of its like musical journey it takes you on. And yet that musical journey is very much like this dude is struggling with himself and against culture.
Right.
And ends in sort of a dark place, right? So that song has a sort of hopeful ending, but there's always this like carried through angst about these bands. Now, at the same time as that's going on, because we have to get to this band because of how important they are culturally, Rage Against the Machine.
Okay.
They come out with their first album, which is self-titled Rage Against the Machine, with the picture of the Buddhist monk setting themselves on fire in Saigon to protest the South Vietnamese treatment of Buddhists.
Right.
So that's a very famous photo.
Okay.
That's their album cover for their first album.
Right.
And they are singing about the 92 LA race riots explicitly.
Right.
They are singing about police brutality. They are singing about white supremacy. They are singing about the military industrial complex. They are singing about corrupt politicians. They're singing about capitalism. They are explicitly a political art band.
Yes.
And they remain popular all the way into the modern period. They are still considered like a huge name. Everybody except for their lead singer is still in a band together up to this day.
Wow.
And still like selling out huge shows. They're big. They did the Occupy Wall Street thing like 5 years before Occupy Wall Street happened. In fact, they're cited as one of the main inspirations for it. That the band Rage Against the Machine sort of, I think, captures the best of the 90s in terms of its like political, like very straightforward, very blunt, very angry approach to political issues.
Yes.
And that's the sort of, I think I think that band is sort of the best example of the zeitgeist of the early 90s. There's also obviously, when we're talking about the 90s, there's the boy band, there's the pop music. But all of that, I think, is sort of a flash in the pan of what pop music becomes later, which incorporates rap and incorporates the anger of pop punk and of the protest music of the 90s. Right? So Britney Spears kind of gets replaced with like an Avril Lavigne.
Yeah.
Which is much more angsty.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, because even like, so more recently, I happen to like some of her songs, but I listen to some of Billie Eilish's songs, and like some of them are somewhat dark. So it's not all, it's not all like the sugary stuff. And there's kind of it does seem to me, okay, would you say in the teens that there's more of an equilibrium kind of between, like, there's not as much, and I'm wondering if culturally, I'm not sure. This is what's so interesting, is because it does seem like music is kind of following the path of, say, visual media, say like television, movies. So instead of you just having three major channels, like, so you go back in time, you have three major channels, and a lot of it was put into those, and it was all live television, or you went to the theater, you saw the film, you had to be there, see it live, or when it was being shown in the theater, I mean. So anyway, with the digital age, now we have all this stuff on demand. There's first cable television. Well, here's the thing. We have so many options today that now it's not really like you can pretty much find whatever you want to watch, whatever kind of movie you want to watch, whatever kind of music you want to listen to, whatever kind of programs you want to watch. If you want, you can watch cartoons 24/7. Okay. If that's your thing. This is what is kind of interesting to me, is that overall culture has kind of gone this route where everybody is kind of like, we're giving people options and letting people kind of do their own thing. So there's not really like I don't know, do girls still scream like, at concerts like the women used to do, like at Elvis and the Beatles?
But now they're screaming at Taylor Swift.
Oh, okay.
So yeah. It's a little bit different.
I mean, there was this thing, because you were saying celebrity and their own celebrity, but there was a long period of time where like Americans had this thing like somehow celebrities were like on a higher level than everybody else. And so like now I think everybody, like some of that's kind of dissipated away, and we just, these people are
for sure
incredibly talented, but they're still just people like us. Okay.
I think the way that my generation measures a person's merit for celebrity is more like, how well can you capture what we are feeling right now?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how well can you express what we're all feeling? So like Billie Eilish hits the scene with Bad Guy.
Yeah.
And we're feeling a particular way in the country at the time, because that was like right when Donald Trump was elected president. So I think there is sort of a capturing of like this mass feeling that goes on. But I also think that like, yes, everybody has options for whatever they want to listen to. But I think that the Zoomers and the Gen Alpha that's sort of coming up isn't as into the rawness of millennial music.
Okay.
And so I'm sort of like predicting here, but I think because of the internet and meme culture becoming really relevant for music, especially through TikTok, that like these are no longer songs, they're just sounds that are in the background of things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there is some valid critique of being so open about things that you end up glorifying them and sort of making them the litmus test for whether or not you belong. Is like, do you have problems?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And also like for some people, being exposed to that can like trigger them for certain things. There's like a greater consciousness of like, maybe not everything belongs out there. Not that there's not art dealing with those things, but that's not the pop art anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. It does seem that there's kind of a pattern. Well, there is a little bit of a pattern. So you have like a transitional period. So like we have the 60s, you have protests, then you have other people that are just trying to go ahead with business as usual. The protest kind of dies down in the 70s, and then people kind of settle into just, hey, let's kick back and enjoy life. And then this carries over through the 80s, where you kind of perfect this a bit. Then you come back to the 90s, and there's a new round of kind of cultural protest. And then it does seem like 2000s, it starts settling back down again. 2010, now it's just about, hey, let's just enjoy it and be innovative. And I wonder if you could, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of interesting, because there was some of this, I think, also like during the Great Depression, with like folk songs and things like that, that were pushing back about, the unfairness and the money situation. But then and then the World War. But then everybody wanted to kind of settle down, have a good time. So the late 40s into the 50s, it was all like kind of feel good music. It wasn't really, and even like the rock and roll stuff, it wasn't like a protest. It was more like, hey, we're going to have fun. We're going to cut loose. And that wasn't real, the older generations weren't really thrilled about that. But it does seem like there's this kind of like a cycle. So every 25, 30 years or whatever, you come back around to some, and we may be, who knows, we may be ripe for another round of protest music coming up in the next several years.
Well, so one of the questions I sort of had after doing some of the research for the development of music over the last 30 years is, where was all the protest music in 2016? Like, there is protest music. There's FDT, the Eminem came out with a thing that was protest, but it was all like sort of old guard people doing the protest music. And I came across some people that were writing about, are we repeating Dadaism, which was an art movement from like the 30s and 40s,
right?
Which was protesting fascism.
Yes. Yes.
By just being absurd, saying that this has gotten so bad that there's no meaning left. So this is just like, look how absurd the world has become. Yeah. And that being reflected in art. And I think there is something to say, like, is there a reborn Dadaism in things like TikTok and meme music being sort of the default genre? Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me wonder. Where we're going to end up with this. Or, I mean, we're not going to necessarily end up with it, but where it's going to go next, I should say. What's our takeaway here? So what have we learned about the generation so far, and understanding, how they're processing? There's a certain part of me that says, okay, there's another aspect of this, because there's like world events and there's these shifts back and forth. I don't know that everybody goes through, like, I think a lot of people that grew, like, who were teenagers in the 60s, like, I remember them saying about this, well, everybody goes through the rebellious period when they're teenagers. Well, I didn't really do that. Like, now, maybe I was just incredibly boring or whatever, but I didn't see any purpose in that, or at least it didn't seem like it was going to serve me any purpose. Okay. I know people that had rebellious phases, but I would say this, maybe it's the case that each person, like from puberty on, goes through one period of about a decade or so where there is big cultural change. And then after that finally settles down, they're like, okay, I don't want to have to deal with any more change now. And so they'll have to make these changes after I'm gone, after I'm dead. And there's a part of me that I think we catch different people, because, again, when we put people in these groups, it's not like you can say, well, gee whiz, he was born in 65. If I'd been born in 66, I'd have much different characteristics. Well, not really.
Right.
I mean,
yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So, like, this stuff just kind of gradually shifts, and you catch different people at different points in time. But I do think... Well, go ahead.
I think I would push back a little bit against that narrative.
Okay.
And I would say, like, yes, I think there's a time when people generally tend to be more politically motivated.
Right.
Especially in their art. But I think a better interpretation, like the protest music of the 60s, what Marvin Gaye is singing about, what Creedence Clearwater Revival is singing about, just never got fixed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like... So, the
that's
new generation
true.
is...
That's true.
Stylistically, we're different in terms of what we're singing about. But there's very little difference between, like, what's going on and Marvin Gaye saying, like, are you paying attention to what's happening in the ghetto right now? Mm-hmm. And NWA Straight Outta Compton.
Yeah.
In terms of like content and social concern, there's very little difference there.
Well, that's true.
It's just stylistically very different.
Well, that is true. You know, I've often wondered, why is it that society only makes a certain, like, why change comes so slowly? And I don't know. I just think that a lot of people don't want to have to make these kind of big adjustments in the way they think about life, like with a new paradigm. They don't want to have to make more than one paradigm shift in their adult life. I don't know. I'm still thinking about this, but this has me thinking about that, because I really do think that part of what's going on here is the extended lifespan that we have, and we have more generations alive now at the same time than we ever have before. And so, I mean, imagine if, say, 95% of the people that were over 75 died. I mean, how radically would that start changing things? And I think it would make a significant difference. I'm not saying that's an answer to anything, but I'm just saying these are part of the dynamics. Just like if you went back, like in the civil rights era, and people had lived to be 100 years old back then, my golly, I think getting civil rights legislation passed would have been so much more difficult.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, boy, I think we've put our finger on a number of things here. I think I really enjoyed this. I learned a lot. Now I've got to go back and listen to some of these groups. So I kind of was self-restricted to a great extent when I was younger, didn't listen to a broad span of music. And then after, as I grew as an adult and got into my 30s, I started going back and listening to. So like my musical expansion started backwards first. I went back and then listened to all the stuff that I didn't let myself listen to or wasn't supposed to listen to growing up, and then went backwards. And then since then, in the past 15 years, I've been working my way forward and keeping up. So like even some of the songs you've mentioned, I like knew the songs. I just could not place them. I didn't realize that, like I mentioned, Baby Got Back. I didn't realize that was such an old song back from the 90s.
Quite old.
Yeah, like I didn't realize it was that old. I thought maybe it had been like 20 years old, but
I didn't really cover like pop through this era.
Yeah.
But I think part of that is like in the 90s, like there are some pop songs that people will know today, but most pop didn't live long lives.
No.
Like I feel like people know Like a Virgin by Madonna.
Yeah.
But they won't know like some of the bigger pop songs from the 90s.
Well, see, and this is the thing. It's the same thing like with all kinds of media, even including books. Because of our technology now, there's more and more stuff that's self-published. So back in the day, you couldn't be heard by anybody unless you got signed by a major label. You know, you had to have somebody that at least had some reach if you wanted your stuff to be heard. And the bigger the label, the bigger an audience you could get. Now you can, like you said, you can make your own. You have a computer, an internet connection. You can put your own stuff out there, and you know you can become popular like Justin Bieber. Okay, and so it's just like with books. You used to have to sell your book to a publisher and get a publisher that wanted to put it out there. And if you couldn't find a publisher, then your writing just stayed there at your home and nobody ever got to read it. But now there's all kinds of ways you can put that out there. And so I'm not saying everything becomes generic, but it's not, we're getting, let's put it this way. The good side is, I think in the old days, there were a lot of talented people that were passed over because they didn't have the right connections or whatever. And there were a lot of, say, diamonds in the rough that if people had known about them, they could have done something significant. But now we at least get to hear whatever, we get to you get a chance to be heard. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But at the same time,
I mean, we're on the air technically.
Yes, exactly. But it's not like we've gone through some sort of sieve that we had to compete with.
No, we're just
500 other shows to get our show out there. So
right. We're not on live radio.
It's much more difficult, right, to be the one to break through to get a huge audience.
Right.
And so I think it's the same way with music. And so it just depends on how you look at it. I think overall
one
it's
of the
good.
other one of the other like consequences of how accessible music is and how like making music has become more accessible. Another consequence of that is that music has become much more cross-cultural.
Yes.
For our specifically my generation, like the Zillennials, we grew up before like K-pop hit the scene. But then I was in high school when Gangnam Style came out, and it was a cultural phenomenon.
I remember.
For a completely Korean-speaking, middle-aged man, to be doing a funny dance and get an international audience.
Really, he was middle-aged?
Yeah,
I thought this group like they were all in their 20s or something.
No, I think he was in his 30s when Gangnam Style came out.
But him. Him. Yes.
Yeah.
I was still thinking of was it the butter? I always say the Hot Butter Group. That's a song.
The Hot Butter Group.
Well,
I don't know if I know that one, but like BTS
Hot
is
like
huge
butter.
now. I don't know it.
You don't know that song?
Oh,
geez. It's that other Korean group. Well, anyway, I'll have to look it up.
But like Psy is such an interesting like point because it's like the first time a song in Korean hits that level.
Yes.
Like you don't have to be singing in English anymore.
Right.
And that like along with Despacito and Danza Kuduro and like there's a lot of these like non-English songs anymore that are huge.
Yes.
And that is like, I think one of the bigger differences between the older generation and my generation.
Yeah.
I mean, there are lots of songs in Japanese that are very popular that I love.
Well, yeah,
and listen to all the time.
You can find all kinds of stuff. I'm laughing because did you ever listen to the older lady on YouTube who calls herself Wing?
No.
I think she's Japanese, but like she's like singing AC/DC songs and stuff. And like, I'm on the highway to hell. it just cracks me up. You can hear you can hear pretty much whatever you want to find now. But that makes it more difficult for somebody to have like a huge rippling effect like, used to be. Overall, well, I think it's good, but yeah.
Looking forward, I think that intercultural stuff is going to come up when we talk about television specifically.
Yes.
Because my generation has been more influenced by international TV than the generations before us.
Oh, yeah.
Because we grew up with anime on TV. We grew up with these like non-American forms of entertainment.
Well, it's just amazing to me how many even like British programs now are popular in the United States. There's someone like leading. I mean, there was a fair share of British shows that aired in the United States. I mean, there was The Avengers and Man from U.N.C.L.E., I think, was another one, and or The Saint with Roger Moore, who later was James Bond, replaced Sean Connery. Yeah. Anyway, and Benny Hill. I used to, when I was a teenager, that was the guilty pleasure. So, like, whenever I would stay at my cousin's or he'd stay at my house, we would turn the TV down. We'd stay up and watch Benny Hill. It was like shown on the independent channels because, we just weren't, the American TV, that was still a little too risque or whatever. But they would like show at 11 o'clock at night or something, 11:30 at night. So, but as teenagers, you try to stay up and you get a kick out of that stuff. But anyway, but now, like Downton Abbey, it's like all these shows, the Royals and it's just really...
Well, like Great British Baking Show, even the rise of popularity of like Doctor Who.
Yeah. Right. And I think it's, I think that'll just continue. I like listening, like even going back and finding old stuff that was international. So like, I found, like music by Kraftwerk, who was,
oh yeah. Uh-huh.
From Germany.
I love Kraftwerk.
The 70s. Yeah. And then also, a group called the Jokers. They were early 60s from Belgium. And in fact, they're the ones that Rick Derringer in Rock and Roll Hoochie Coo, he says about the Jokers were thrown. He went to a party and Jokers were throwing it down. But these guys, they were never really marketed right. And like there's all these like groups that like remained obscure that you can at least discover them now. It's kind of neat. So
yeah, well, in my generation, if we're talking about other European music besides British music,
yes,
one of the biggest artists of my generation is Daft Punk with electronic music.
Yes,
and they're French, and a lot of very good electronic music comes out of France.
Oh, I'll have to check that out then. Now, I've heard that. Is it Daft Punk?
Daft
Punk. Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that sounds good. Well, we are going to, I'm not sure if, do you want to just go right into film for our next two episodes, or do you want to do something else and come back to it?
Either film or TV, and then
let's do that.
I'm going to struggle to fit in the cultural importance of video games somewhere in here.
Well, yeah, recreation, pastimes, and things like that. Yes.
Because there's not like an equivalent for the earlier generations.
Right.
So I'll find a way to shoehorn that in.
Okay. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's we're going to call that a wrap for today, and we'll come back and continue some of our intergenerational analysis by looking at either film or television the next time around. So we hope you tune in. If the world doesn't end, that's beforehand. We're going to go back to that, and we'll continue down this path and hope bring more mutual understanding between the generations. Anyhow,
it's just hitting me how much censorship I'm going to have to do on this episode.
Well, okay. There was a couple cuckoo moments there. Well, anyhow, we weren't using.
There's just a lot of the F word in my generation's music. So.
Yes. So yes. And again, it wasn't that was your commentary. That's what the lyrics.
It's the name of the song.
Right. It's the name of the song. Right. So anyway, it's the difference between showing if you're analyzing a nude painting versus sitting there in the nude yourself. So anyway, there's a big difference. Reach out to us. Let us know what you think about these episodes. And we appreciate you taking the time to spend this hour or so with us. We hope you take care. And again, if the world doesn't end before, we'll be back very soon. All the best to you.